Hello and welcome to the oddschecker betting show sponsored by 888 Sport. I am your host George Elek and this is day 2 of the Cheltenham Festival preview, the Wednesday of the festival, and I'm joined by two expert guests, Andy Holding and Rory Delargy, who'll be sharing their expert insights and tips with us throughout the show. But before we hear from them, we're very lucky to be able to call on 888 Sport ambassador, former jockey and Cheltenham legend Barry Geraghty, and Andy and I spoke to him a bit earlier. Yeah, and before we get into our Wednesday preview, delighted as ever to be joined by 888 Sport ambassador Barry Geraghty. And Barry, it's the Wednesday of Cheltenham Festival. It's Champion Chase Day. And I'm not going to be talking to you here on this podcast and not talk to you about Sprinter Sacre and that Champion Chase back in 2013. I mean, one of the most exhilarating performances we've seen. How was that day and what are your memories of it?
Oh, it was brilliant. Obviously he went into the race with high hopes. So he was meeting sides in Europe, who was a high-class winner of the race before. We went a really good gallop, but for me, it was all about just getting Sprinter relaxed. Have him relaxed, coast through the race. And once you could get him switched off early, you knew that his finishing kick was going to be serious. But he was brilliant through the race. He travelled, he pinged fences. I remember the last ditch, actually, I gave him a little bit of a squeeze, a bit like Harry Cobden did on Brave Man's Game in Newbury a few weeks ago, and he stuck in a short one. But he was electric after that. I went to the last one. I could see about 5 or 6 strides and I'm a mad long stride. And I said, go on, let's go for it, roll it. And he flew the last up the hill. I think he won 20 lengths. It was a massive performance, but that's how good he was. He was just such a classy performer.
Yeah, from one superstar to possibly another. We have Shishkin as the 4-6 favourite for the Champion Chase this time around. In your mind, if he goes and wins this and wins it well, are we starting to look at one of the modern day greats in the game?
It has the potential, and it looks a really strong race as well, which is how you get a real champion. He has to stand out in good company. So no, I think he can be. He's probably a little bit more relaxed than Sprinter Sacre. He's more in the Altia mould, which is a very good mould. He's a worthy favourite, but I think it is a good race, and there's questions to be answered too. An argument I suppose got put in his place in Ascot, and Shishkin is probably better going left-handed than he is going right-handed. So you could argue there's improvement in Shishkin there. I'm sure they can write an argument slightly differently, but I don't think it's enough to reverse it. There is a bit of chat that Paul Townend will possibly go with Chacun Pour Soi. Willie has obviously taken a different approach to training him. He ran very flat last season in the Champion Chase. He said he's leaving him a piece of work short, which he did in Leopardstown last time. He disappointed in the Tingle Creek, so it's 2 runs in England. He has disappointed on both occasions, but he had a hamstring issue in the Tingle Creek, so I think you can draw a line through that. But just with the word and the vibes on Chacun Pour Soi, he beat Allaho and Nuba Negra. He destroyed them in punches and haven't disappointed at Cheltenham. So he is a high-class horse, and there is still potential there for him to give Shishkin something to worry about. So a little bit like Appreciation in the Champion Hurdle versus Honeysuckle, there might be a little bit of value in taking on Shishkin with Chacun Pour Soi, I feel.
Yeah, I'm obviously a big fan like you are, Barry, both Shishkin and Energumin. That was a hell of a race at Ascot. But because it was such a bruising encounter on soft ground at a track that does take plenty of getting, is there a danger that either one of those two horses, could have easily just bottomed themselves, similar to like a Surname against Altior many years ago? I mean, obviously we'll only find out on the day, but would that be playing on your mind going out there if you were riding in one of those two?
Well, I suppose the Surname Altior clash was first run of the season, so a tough race first run, it can be harder to get over, and it was for both of those horses. That was a grueler. So the Ascot race was a really tough race, but for me, an Energumin had a tougher time than Shishkin. Shishkin hit the line. He had I won't say he had a bitten hand, but he could have galloped away for another little bit if needs be, where I think an Energumin had the white flag up. He was happy to see the line. So, but I would imagine both horses, they've had plenty of time to recover from then, and it wasn't the first run of the season. So that it does count for a lot. And obviously Nicky had ducked the Tingle Creek, which would have been his first run, and he was proved right when the horse had a dirty scope afterwards. So all these things add up, and that's what trainers are trying to, find the right place to start with your horse in the right place. So I wouldn't be concerned with a mid-season race like that, especially over that strip, where if you go over further, it would maybe take more out of other horses, or if you were closer to the festival itself, it would be more of a concern. But I'd be happy enough personally with how both should have come out of that, and both have been schooling and have been seen out since. There's no issues reported.
You mentioned there that there might be some value siding, well, backing one of the horses against Shishkin. If you were to choose your ride, if you were to come back on the saddle and choose a ride here, would you still take the favourite?
I think you'd have to. It'd be hard not to. I'd Chacun Poursois, he has a chance. I think there's value in him opposing, but no, you'd have to go with Shishkin. He's so good around Cheltenham. He's great form there. He's proven, as I mentioned, Chacun Poursois still has a bit to prove in England. But it's competitive. It's more competitive maybe than the market suggests. But I do believe Shishkin is a worthy favourite. He's the one you'd want to be on. But Chacun Poursois might just have unfinished business.
Those of us who have never ridden a horse, let alone ridden a horse at the Cheltenham Festival, Andy and I will sit around WhatsApping each other or sitting in a pub saying, it doesn't get up the hill, he hates Cheltenham, all this stuff. As somebody who actually knows what it takes for a horse to be successful at the Cheltenham Festival and at Cheltenham Racecourse generally, what are the reasons you can think of as to why a horse like Chacun Poursois, whose quality is proven and is clearly evident to anybody who's watched him race over in Ireland, why he maybe wouldn't travel so well, either at Cheltenham itself or just travelling over the Irish Sea?
Yeah, so Chacun last year, he didn't, you talk about getting up the hill in Cheltenham, he didn't get up the first hill as he faced the fourth last. He wasn't in Paul Townend's hands the way he should have been, coming down the hill over 3 out. He was giving him a squeeze rather than taking him back, which you would have expected. And so he underperformed that day, probably to somewhere like 80%, I would have felt. And it wasn't a vintage renewal last season. But I think we got our answer when Willie said he left him a gallop short going to Leopardstown recently. So he's a horse who's probably a little bit better fresh. The travel over to England last season, he just took the edge off him, I'd imagine. So he's going to leave him short. He'll go there fresh. Willie Mullins knows how to train horse, as does any of the top class trainers. So I think that is where the improvement's going to be got from last season. And you can draw a line through his Tingle Creek run because it was reported straight away that he had a hamstring issue on the day. He didn't jump with his normal fluency. He was a little bit lackluster in the championships last year, but he did jump okay. Whereas in the Tingle Creek, he wasn't jumping, he wasn't going. So his performances this season in Ireland have been really good, but his performance last season in Punchestown haven't disappointed at Cheltenham when he beat Allaho and Nube Negra. He destroyed them. So he is a proven high class performer, and you have to give him a squeak anyway.
Hypothetical question here, Barry. With regard to Chacun Poursois, would it be more beneficial for him to perhaps run on the new course if the Champion Chase was ever run on the new course rather than the tight inner track of the old course? Do you think that might have some kind of bearing on him?
Well, possibly, but I think you just have to, you trust Willie Mullins, and you just have to forget about last year because he, on reflection, he felt he prepared the horse. He didn't. His preparation wasn't ideal. How he went about it. Where this year he's gone about it differently. So it's going to be really interesting to see the outcome of that. I don't think the course affected him as much as his training program on the run up to it.
Talking about a horse there who hasn't performed at Cheltenham to one who comes alive at Cheltenham. One of my highlights of last year's Cheltenham Festival, although sadly not being there, was seeing Tiger Roll return to some form. One of the most popular horses in training, came into last year's festival, form figures of, 6, pulled up 6, and then goes and puts in that performance, comes here off the back of finishing 4th in the Aintree Bowl, being pulled up at Aintree in December, and then 14 of 17, beaten 31 lengths in January. Not many horses, not many races where he would still come to the festival 7-4 favourite. What do you make of Tiger Roll's chances?
I'd imagine the ground is the key to him. The better the ground, the better for him. And he absolutely threw his form book out the window last year when he destroyed the field on the back of so many average and poor runs. He does come alive here. You hear about horses, Manila Indo in particular, horses that love Cheltenham, springtime, sun on the back, all those things, they all add up. Tiger Roll's a bit of a character too. So you'll find those longer days, bit more sunshine, bit more heat, might just lift his mood and his form. He trains better, he performs better. So he is the one to beat on better ground. But I was with Gordon at the weekend, and he's sweet on Delta work if the ground was on the slow side. So he might have this race both angles covered.
Andy, what do you make of, we'll talk about this shortly with Rory in our preview. What do you make of Tiger Roll at 7-4 this time around?
I think it was just very significant last year, having watched Tiger Roll's previous runs when he was dropped out the back, that they lined him up at the front in last year's cross country. I remember looking at the start thinking, oh, they really do mean business here. All of a sudden they got him motivated. He got to the front and he puffed his chest out, and from the word go he got into a brilliant rhythm. And I think for a long, long way out I was thinking, Tiger Roll's got this. And I think you'll probably see the same kind of tactic again. I think they'll rev him up down the start, make sure that he's got no possibility of going to sleep, dropping the bridle, racing lazily. They'll kick him, kick him out into the first and really, get him stoked up. So I think if they do exactly the same again, the result could easily be the same.
I would absolutely love to be there. Always a great moment when you're there on the Wednesday, running across the track over to go and see Tiger Roll in the middle on the cross-country course. Barry, before we let you go, what would be your nap, your best bet on Wednesday's card?
So at this stage, the Ballymore, I suppose, is up in the air. But if Sir Gerhard lines up here, I don't see him come off the bridle. I think he's different class. If you compare the Supreme to the Ballymore, the Supreme looks to have more depth than the Ballymore. And no, Sir Gerhard to stand out if he goes there for me.
Barry, we'll find out your thoughts. We're not going to ask you now. We'll find out your thoughts in a couple of minutes when we're speaking to Rory on the Ballymore. Sir Gerhard looking likely at this stage. So we're recording this on Thursday morning to be headed there, but we'll soon find out. Always a difficult game, second guessing Willie, as everyone tries to do this time of year. Barry, we'll be speaking to you. We spoke to you on our Tuesday preview. We'll be speaking to you on our Thursday and Friday as well. So do check that out. But thank you very much for taking the time to join us. 888 Sport Ambassador Barry Geraghty. Always great to catch up with 888 Sport Ambassador Barry Geraghty. I'm going to miss our chats about Cheltenham after the festival is over. But before I get to chat to Andy and Rory about that, just going to remind you of the fact that oddschecker is the very best tip you can get for this year's Cheltenham Festival. It's under a week away now, and if you're having a bet, you'll get the most out of it by using oddschecker. Compare odds and find the best special offers for every single race. Now then, time to turn our attention to the Wednesday, day 2 of racing. We've already recorded Tuesday, so do go back and look at that. We'll be recording Thursday and Friday after this as well, so do check the oddschecker YouTube page and any podcast platform to find them there. But time now to look at the Ballymore. And we're recording this on Thursday afternoon. The 5-day decks are in. A couple of horses have been scratched from the races, although, as is always the case, most of them are being left in just to keep trainers and owners' options open. But at the time of recording, we have Sir Gerhard at the top of the Ballymore market, the first race of the day on Wednesday. Sir Gerhard is even money. Dysart Dynamo 9-4. I think we can pretty confidently say that if Sir Gerhard runs, Dysart Dynamo will not. Ginto 9-2. Another horse who at the moment looks like he'll be running the Albert Bartlett rather than the Ballymore. So Sir Gerhard, even money likely to run. Journey with Me, probably the next likely runner at 11-2. Stage Star 13-2. Kilcrew, unlikely to run here, 12-1. 3 Stripe Life 12-1. State Man 12-1. Classic Getaway 16-1. Andy, I'll start with you here. It's pretty hard to get a grasp on what does and doesn't run here, apart from the fact that I think we can be fairly sure that if Sir Gerhard runs, then Sir Gerhard probably won't be any bigger than that even money.
Well, the adage, there's no smoke without fire, really does apply to this here, doesn't it? In the last few hours, really, more than 24 hours, all the money's come for Sir Gerhard. He's shored up significant for this race, whether the word on the grapevine that he has been, this race has been nominated as his chosen objective. We'll soon find out in the nearest of time. I think he'll probably run here, but as I said in the other preview, more process elimination run than anything else. I think, sets of connections, obviously the trainer, the jockeys who ride these horses in work, their run styles suggest that they probably think it's going to be difficult to try and stretch out Dysart Dynamo over 2.5 miles. Kilcrook looked really good when they rode him aggressively over 2 miles last time out. Again with him, it looks like they'll want to go down the 2-mile route with him and ride him aggressively over that. So Willie Mullins, who's got 3 leading chances in the Supreme, does he really need another string to his bow? He's then got to look at it, which one of these 3 horses is going to be more suitable to running in the longer race and have just as good a chance as winning. And I think the fact that Sir Gerhard has come out of a point-to-point, he beat Manila Drama, didn't he, 12 lengths in his point-to-point, his first ever run, that would give them a little bit more hope anyway, that he's more likely to get the trip than the other two. It's not in tablets of stone that he'll definitely stay, but that's I can see what the thinking behind it is. Whether he's an even money shot, again, he's open to question, because there's a good bit of depth in this race as well. But look, his time figure at Leopardstown and the way he won, the fact that a lot of those horses were strung out in behind him, your Three Stripe Lights, your Colonel Mustard, your Farouk, your Stutz. I mean, Statuaire won the Royal Bond early on in the season. She was absolutely tailed off. So it just shows you what performance Sir Gerhard did that day. And again, if you compare his run to Honeysuckle, and I do a lot of that, putting the two races up on split screen and letting them go for the final circuit, so you can get an impression of how the race panned out. Sir Gerhard was quicker than Honeysuckle all the way around on that last circuit. If he can maintain that gallop over 2.5 miles, then he's going to be very difficult to catch. Yes, his jumping could be tidied up. You could make an argument he's got to jump more hurdles in the Ballymore, so he might make more mistakes. Although you could say if they're going a bit slower, then he might not. His jumping might not be putting so much pressure.
On the other hand, he jumped brilliantly on his debut, so we know that he can jump really well.
Exactly. Yeah.
The interesting thing I thought about that Leopardstown race was they had to bypass the hurdle because of the low sun.
Yeah.
So they had them all lining up to race, and then they stopped them, and you had a sort of 6 or 7 minute delay before they were sent on the way. I just thought that upset him, and he was not concentrating. He was looking at the camera car on the way around. They also had quite blustery wind there as well. I think there was plenty of things that might just have put him off in the first half of that race. He gathered himself up very well in the second half and was much better. And again, the one thing you'd criticise him about on debut was he was only winning a maiden hurdle and doing it as he liked, so you didn't know what the depth of the form was. But he proved that at Leopardstown second time. So I thought I'm inclined to look positively about his jumping and say, given a lead, he looks a very slick jumper. So I wouldn't worry too much about that personally.
He was about 10 lengths quicker than Honeysuckle in that Dublin Racing Festival meeting. But as Rory said, he had to go wide round the second last to bypass it. So he's actually covered even more ground and still run, huge over a proper good genuine Grade 1 mare. So yeah, he's very, very good. I took the view out of that race that Connections of Three Stripe Life ought to be thinking about the Ballymore, because I thought, well, everyone's saying Sir Gerhard should go for the Supreme, and Tom Segal tipped him. They're trying to convince Willie Mullins to run him in the 2 miles, but I think he stood firm and decided to go Sir Gerhard here. But it definitely brings Three Stripe Life into the bet without the favourite category, because I think wherever Sir Gerhard finishes, you'd like to think that Gordon Elliott's charge would be somewhere close. Yeah. And who's to say that he won't improve for stepping up? He looks like he will. He's just been a very consistent horse throughout his life. He was fourth behind Sir Gerhard in last year's bumper, so he's got Cheltenham Festival experience. I think he was a bit unlucky not to beat Mighty Potter in the Grade 1 previously at the Christmas meeting. He headbutted the second last, didn't he, when he was in contention. He did really well to end up running on to finish second. So, there's another form line to suggest he's got to go well. But whichever way you strip it down, once this field gets watered down and you're probably only left with like 8 or 10 runners, Three Stripe Life all of a sudden 12 to 1 doesn't look a bad bit of each way business, does it? He's another one I'm definitely going to be sticking into some each way multiples. Non-runner no bet, in the hope that he doesn't run in the first, because now Gordon Elliott's saying that Ginto's going in the other. I mean, Gordon Elliott hasn't got another runner in this, has he?
I'm pressing up the Supreme as we speak.
Oh yeah, but he hasn't got another run. No, he hasn't. This is his only other runner. He's only runner in this, so makes sense that he'll go here. Gordon will like a runner in every race. Yeah. And the other one to mention, just very briefly, is a horse I tipped. I've had a bit of a disaster on my anti-post tips. Funny enough, I've only tipped in 2 races this year. I've been very quiet. But one of the horses I put up was What Do You Want, who was favourite, or nearly favourite, to win the Lawlers of Naas. But he got a horrendous ride by Darragh O'Keefe that day. I don't really know why they used Darragh that day. I think Danny Mullins had been riding him previously, but anyway, I think he must be connected to the owner or something like that. But he still looked as though he was going to win going out at the last, but that effort to get there, I even got caught up in a schmozzle off the home turn, took his toll. I put him up at 25 to 1. He's still 25 to 1 now, but apparently he had an away day the other day, did a good bit of work at Leopardstown, and he went amazingly well apparently. And if he's back to the kind of form that saw him won that Navan Maiden easily, and you forgive him his last run, he's another one with a chance. Of course, the sponsors own this horse, and they won it before with the Thingamartin Brazils, City Island.
Yeah.
That was my thinking by putting this horse up. Thought Willie Mullins, if he wins the Law as an ace, I'll stick a 25 to 1 to be. I'm looking at 4 to 1 favourite here. Yeah. Unfortunately, it didn't work out, but
interestingly, his best performance came on good soft ground.
Yeah. He just floundered in that ground, and he had wheel spin and everything that could have gone wrong. I was fuming after that race because he got a shocking ride. But he's a very good horse, he is, and I think if he runs, he's definitely the second string, but he's no forlorn hope.
Yeah. What do you want? 25 to 1.
You put him down as an almost certain runner, wouldn't you? Given connections.
I think so,
yeah. Why would they not run him?
Yeah.
It's the only horse they've entered.
So he might be one of those that you want to back all in rather than the non-runner bet.
Yeah.
I think you get 33s.
3-Stroke Life 12 to 1 as it is at the moment. Roy, do you have anything to try and to back each way beyond 3-Stroke Life?
Well, yeah, as I said, I've backed 3-Stroke Life in the Supreme because Gordon seemed pretty adamant he was going to go there. But now that he's moved Ginto up to the Albert Barker, that does leave a gap. So, maybe people are putting 2 and 2 together and getting 5. But it does seem an obvious move that he would go here. But as I said, I've always found Gordon to be pretty straight when he's talking about targets for his horses and issues and what he thinks of them. And he was adamant that 3-Stroke Life would run in the Supreme. So I've been happy to back him at a massive price for that. But yeah, there's not much depth in this compared to the Supreme. There are some very nice horses entered in it, but who's going to run in the end? You're going to have an odds-on favourite, and the shape of Sir Gerhard, assuming he runs, and therefore there is scope. And the point that Andy's made it as well, that race at Leopardstown, the Sir Gerhard one was the best novice hurdle run this season by miles. We didn't mention my mate Mozzie was beaten 50 lengths as well. So you've got some very good horses absolutely tailed off in that race, with no real indication that they didn't really run the race. They were just sort of cut off at halfway because the pace was very strong and they couldn't get back into it again. So I think that's really strong, and that's why I think I said afterwards I would back the first 3 home in that race wherever they go next, and that's exactly what I've done. I've backed Sir Gerhard. I've backed 3-Stroke Life at big prices for the Supreme. I will have a saver here as well, and of course I backed Colonel Mustard in the County Hurdle, because if you take a strong view on a race and you think it's very strong, then you've got to you've got the possibility of doing a sort of an related contingency. You can back the 3 of them in a well, hopefully it run in 3 different races. You can have a nice little tricksy there, and essentially your value is, if you're right in your view, your value is multiplied rather than diminished.
Absolutely. On then to the second race, the formerly RSA Chase, the Brown Advisory Novice Chase, and we've got Galopin de Champ is the 10 to 11 favourite, but unless we're going to have a one-runner Turners, I think that's unlikely to be taken up. So Brave Man's Game, for all intents and purposes, is the favourite at 15 to 8, ahead of L'Homme Pressé at 4 to 1, Ahoy Senor 5 to 1, Capo Dano 7 to 1, 335 12 to 1, Fury Road, Run Wild Fred, Statler all 14 to 1, Dusart 16s, and Bigger. Rory, will come to you here. It feels like when we do the Turners preview on Thursday, a lot of these horses have entries for both, and the majority of them, it looks like, will be turning up here.
Yes, I've got a pretty strong view in this race. I think Ahoy Senor is a really solid bet, mainly because I've just taken a long-term view that he's a better prospect down the line than Brave Man's Game. Brave Man's Game is a better horse at the moment. But what we've seen of Brave Man's Game, both over hurdles and over fences, is that he immediately shows you what you can do. Within a second start over hurdles, he was showing very high class form, and he was running very, very close to that form all season last year as a novice. And it's only when he ran into horses of the class of Bob Ollinger that he was found out. But of course, he was beaten by Ahoy Senor at Aintree. The line generally after that was that he was over the top for the season. But if you look at the numbers, look at the speed figures he produced, he ran to form at Aintree. He was just beaten by an exceptional horse on the day. And people haven't, because he was a big price, Ahoy Senor, and because he's had a slightly up and down season thus far, we've kind of forgotten that he definitely beat Brave Man's Game on merit. at Aintree. Maybe Aintree is the kind of course that he needs. Maybe he needs a big flat track, a real galloping track like that with long straights, because he wasn't particularly happy at Kempton when he was beaten by Brave Man's Game. And if he met Brave Man's Game, in similar circumstances, away from Cheltenham, you'd probably fancy Brave Man's Game, to do that again, because he's polished, he's reliable, he keeps getting out and doing it. Whereas a Hoist Senior has given the impression a couple of times that he's got an absolutely monstrous performance in him. And that performance at Aintree last year is right up there. That was just his second start, after all. And he tore a field apart. I've watched that race again, and I tend to be quite wary of Aintree form, because the tables can be turned at Aintree after a long season. Horses aren't at their best after Cheltenham. But I've looked at that race multiple times, and he's just really impressive. Everything he does in that race is perfect. His jumping's really good. His attitude's really good, and he just gallops his rivals into the ground. He hasn't quite managed to do that over fences, but he's hinted twice that he is very much capable of doing that. He was really impressive at Newbury despite making two bad mistakes. And again at Kempton, he just couldn't find a rhythm on a track that didn't suit him. The fences were just coming up a little bit too quick. He was getting into the bottom a little bit. He therefore wasn't able to use it. He's got a tremendous stride when he can use it, but he wasn't ever able to use it at Kempton, so he couldn't get clear of Brave Man's Game. Brave Man's Game's got a better turn of foot at the end of it, and that was that, really. Back to form at Wetherby last time out. A lot of people crabbed that performance because he jumped a bit to his right in the early stages. It didn't bother me at all. I don't mind if a horse is not taking a cut of defence and then going out either left or right, that's a worry. But a horse is going forward and just correcting a little bit, particularly where as the race wears on, they get straighter and straighter. I'm perfectly happy with that, and he was very straight late in the race, and he galloped his rivals into submission there. That wasn't the strongest Grade 2 you're ever going to see, but he did it in nice style. Plenty of people were reasonably impressed with one of the placed horses who changed hands for massive money shortly afterwards. So it wasn't that bad a race, and I do think that if everything falls into place for him, he's the absolute class act in this race. I can see why a lot of people would prefer Brave Man's Game, because you absolutely know what you're getting every race with Brave Man's Game. But I still want to side with what I think is the best horse in the race, and I'm convinced he's the best horse in the race. He just needs to put it all together.
Oh, Senior, the best horse in the race, 5-1 as it stands. Andy, do you agree? I probably think long term, but they're both very similar, aren't they? They've always looked as though the chasing was going to be their game. Yeah. I think it's which one proves themselves to be best over a certain trip. I think Brave Man's Game is quite a speedy horse at the same time, whereas a horse I think is more of a Gold Cup horse, isn't he? Do you think?
I
think a Hoist Senior is...
a Hoist Senior is a Gold Cup horse.
Yeah.
Brave Man's Game strikes me as a Ryanair horse.
Or even a King George horse. Yeah,
yes.
The fact that he's won around Kempton, he beat a Hoist Senior around Kempton that day, suggests that Kempton didn't really suit a Hoist Senior, so back on a more galloping track than you could see a Hoist Senior upholding the form of his Aintree win. I think he's the better jumper of the two as well, Brave Man's Game. I think he's very, very clever. I mean, he just really attacks his fences, and he gives them plenty of respect. So I think he's got an advantage on the jumping front, but whether he really truly stays is I'm yet to be convinced with.
He didn't. He was definitely outstayed at Aintree.
He was outstayed at Aintree.
Again, there was a notion that he was given too much to do that day, but again, if you watch the replay, he's almost alongside at the second last, and the winner powers away from that point onwards. So he's definitely the stronger stayer. Whether this comes down to stamina is, of course, another matter.
Yeah,
but
small field, and all that. And of course, he was outstayed, having an uncontested lead in last year's Ballymore. I was a bit disappointed by his effort, because Bob Hollinger did more wrong than what he did, and yet he still got thrashed. I think long press is the big danger here to these two. Looking at him, he looks as though he's crying out for further, doesn't he? I know he's been winning over 2-5, but he won hitting the line really strong here at the Christmas meeting, and he beat a reasonable field that day. There've been winners out of it all the way down the line. Fantastic Ass, using him as an example. But again, his jumping is so good. I mean, he's the only one out of these three that's been around here, which I think's got to be a massive advantage. Yeah. And I think the ground would be just about ideal for him on Wednesday. Good to soft ground.
But he's got tactical speed and he's got a really good technique. And I think if he improves for going up in trip, then he might just have the measure that he's up the hill because he's got a really good change of pace. Once he's in top cry, he's deadly. So 4-1, I think he'll be bustling up Braveman's game sort of at the front end of the market come Wednesday. I think it'd be 5-2.
4-1 now, best price.
I genuinely think he's going to be the one who's going to shorten dramatically in the build-up.
Hoyson shortened. I mean, he's been a surprisingly big price for a long time because there were various interviews with Lucinda Russell humming and hawing about where he was going, but it's been pretty obvious for a long time he's going to go for this race. She was just making the sort of noises that, you don't have to run at Cheltenham, we could miss Cheltenham altogether if we wanted to. And they entered him in the Gold Cup, but once they didn't run him in the Cotswold Chase, that was pretty much them saying, we're not going to run in the Gold Cup. But they never said that for a long time. They kept saying, we might go in the Gold Cup. But if you're going to do that with a novice, you have to give them a chance outside of novice company first. So I was amazed that his price, he's looking at outright prices rather than run or no bet. He was double figures for a long time. And now he's shortened up to, if you've liked him this season and you haven't backed him in the last few weeks, now is probably just the wrong time to be stepping in for the first time. As Andy says, there might be one or two moves there, but Hoyson probably stays roughly where he is, or maybe drifts half a point or a point. It'd be interesting to see where Braveman's game goes, market-wise, because you could argue that he could be shorter, because people will make that comparison with Denman. He's actually rated higher. He's rated higher now than Denman was when Denman won his first Hennessy, which is just, for me, just shows that the handicapping system doesn't work. There's no way that Braveman's game is a better horse than Denman. But it's perfectly okay to make the comparison because you do tend to look at handicap marks. But Denman got a very ordinary figure for winning his RSA, which he wiped the floor with him. He absolutely destroyed his field there. But he ends up getting surprisingly moderate handicap mark. As I said, lower than Braveman's game has for doing less essentially. But that's just the way the system works these days.
Yeah, well, at the moment, Braveman's game the 15-8 favourite, but a couple to take him on with in L'Homme Press for Andy at 4s and a Hoyson You're at 5-1 for Rory. On then to the Coral Cup, where we've got Good Risk at All and State Man, both a 7-1 favourite. Although, the Shunter is a sea of blue, 8-1, suggesting that this could be the entry of, I think, about 5 entries, but the Shunter could be going for the Coral Cup here at 8-1. The Unexpected Party 9-1, Drop Bianca 9-1, Camperon 10-1, St Felician 10-1, 12-1 Gowel Road. Andy, Gowel Road, a horse that you've given positive mentions for on this podcast over the course of the season. Are you looking to side with Gowel Road again here?
Yeah, I backed him a couple of weeks ago. I've always liked Gowel Road. He was a bit disappointing last year's county hurdle, but that's probably, in hindsight, he had one too many runs, mate, really. And they put the cheek pieces on him that night. He just seemed to resent the cheek pieces. But since then, he's got a good body of work. He ran really well in the Silver Trophy, first time up, probably needed the run. And then he beat Unexpected Party. And this is the reason why I fancied this horse. That day when he won, he was by far and away the fastest horse on that last circuit. He absolutely was, he flew around, he was rapid. And the Skeltons couldn't believe that they got beat with Unexpected Party. And he subsequently proved that by winning very easily last time out. I think
he got quite a bad ride at Cheltenham, didn't he?
Yeah, he probably let...
Comparatively speaking.
Yeah, he did. Yeah. I think they rode him too overconfidently.
Yeah, he came from fairway back, whereas Gowel Road was always really handy and kicked on from the second last, and that probably...
But just on the weights and measures of that run, given what Unexpected Party's done, and Gowel Road, hasn't probably hit the heights as the Skelton runner, he's actually much better off for beating him. And he's back over the same course and distance. His last 2 runs over 2 miles, they crawled in the Jerry Field and with only 4 runs, which didn't suit him. It was a waste of time. And then he ran really well against Metier the other day. But you watch how hard he tried that day against Metier. Metier was in his element on that ground that day, bottomless, boggy ground. And he was just a really tough enough to crack. But he carried 11-12, and he just never stopped trying. You watch him, he's absolutely busting the gut to try and win that race that day. He's got a brilliant attitude.
Again, you look back at his wins at Newbury last season where he really pulls it out of the fire both times.
He's a proper trier. Yeah. And the yard's absolutely flying. We've already discussed, the Twist and Davis camp could not come in here in any better order. And him and sort of Guard Your Dreams have been yo-yoing to and forward in sort of handicaps, grade 3 races. They're a similar kind of horse, but I think this fella's had this race in mind, whereas I think Guard Your Dreams might come here as an afterthought, having run in the race at Fontwell the other day. But he's had 4 runs as well. It's one of the key stats is not to have any more than 4 runs. And you also, it's another stat as well, you can't have too many runs over hurdles in your lifetime, which kind of puts me off, drop the anchor a little bit. I think he's had 17 runs over hurdles. He's not the normal kind of winner of a race of this nature, even though he's been one of the anti-post gambles of the race. I'm really big. There's some handicaps I'm really big on, and this is the one. I'm mad keen on Gower Road.
Gower Road, 12-1, pretty much across the board, including with our sponsors 888 Sport for this one. Rory, strong fancy from Andy there. Do you have a similarly strong view on this?
Yeah, as you might have guessed there, I've always been a fan of Gower Road as well. Just back everything that Andy says up. His form stands close scrutiny, and he's got a wonderful attitude. I liked Guard Your Dreams in this race when I looked at it in the first place, and it's interesting that Nigel is happy to not to confirm Guard Your Dreams and rely on Gower Road. That strikes me as a bit of a statement of intent. I wouldn't want to see the ground get too fast for him, but at the same time he doesn't need it bottomless. He's just a trier. So yeah, good at soft ground to be absolutely fine. There's plenty in here. I'm not mad on the shunter. I know he was sort of a bit of a handicap plot last season, throughout the season, but he kept winning those races. He's not been winning much recently, and the handicappers has had a chance to probably reassess him. The other interesting thing is, we're talking about trainers in and out of form. Emmett Mullins had a winner the other day. It was his first winner since November. A lot of fancied horses from the yards, and maybe it's a sign that he's coming back to form, but I'd be slightly worried. He's always been a high percentage yard, Emmett, and the fact that he went through a long period of not getting any winners would concern me. You'll see maybe 4 or 5 JP horses and handicaps getting punted over the next few days. There always seems to be a JP multiple, and I can't really see JP being the kind of guy who walks into a betting shop and says, "I'll have £1,000 Yankee, please." You
can stop when you say, "I don't really see JP walking to a betting shop." I think.
So I've seen this before. There are always sort of 4 or 5 buzz horses that are backed in betting shops in multiples, and theoretically they're always JP horses, and there's a theoretical connection. These are the horses he's backing. I don't really see him doing that, to be perfectly honest. I can see that there is a connection there, to the owner to some degree, that people are trying to second guess what the fancied horses are going to be. But what happens every year is you end up having 4 false favourites. Horses who could easily be 25-1 shots, but because they've been punted in little Yankees or whatever all around the country, they end up, people go, this is the JP horse, and it automatically goes towards the head of the market. And some of them have good chances. Some of them are just absolutely terrible favourites. So just be wary of thinking because 10 days before the festival, there appears to be a gamble in a JP horse. That won't take much money to cause that gamble, and it may well have very little substance to it. I wouldn't say that's absolutely the case for the shunter, but I do think he's got a lot more against him this year than he had last year.
Wonder if JP's watching after just coming back from the betting shop saying, you don't know what you're talking about, Rory. On then to the Champion Chase, where Shishkin is the 4-6 favourite ahead of Energumene at 7-2, Chacun Pour Soi 9-2, Nuba Negra 10-1, Envoy Allen 20-1 with Put the Kettle On, and Funambul Savola 33-1 bar. And Andy, Shishkin here in a thrilling encounter, touched off Energumene. Some said he looked beat, some said he was never in trouble, but the price at the moment 4-6, 7-2, is that a fair reflection, do you think, off the back of what we saw there, or is Energumene going to be one of those, or Chacun Pour Soi, who goes into your big each way perm?
I can certainly see that angle, yeah. Normally when you get a 4-7 chance and 8-10 run a race, when there's only a handful that can possibly win, it normally would be a cracking option to go with Chacun Pour Soi. Shame about obviously Energumene having that little setback. I think that's one of the reasons why Shishkin shortened and Energumene obviously now is a much bigger price. There wasn't a great deal between them at Ascot, and yet, based on what we've seen here on the market, there should have been. It looks like there was a 10-length difference between them. They obviously both had very hard races. You've got to bear that in mind. Will they recover in time? It was 50 odd days, so that should be fine. But you know, look what happened to Altior and Surname back in the day. But ultimately, I just think Shishkin's just a better horse. He's proven around the track as well, which I think has got to be an advantage of some description, because Nergamine has never run around Cheltenham. And he's just got such an amazing engine, hasn't he, Shishkin? I think the better ground will help him as well. There's parts of that race at Ascot, he looked just a little bit laboured in the ground. But ultimately, his class came through. Once he got into top gear, he ground down the Nergamine, and he might have just broken Nergamine's heart on that occasion. But it's going to be a fascinating race that I'll probably sit back and enjoy and watch rather than have a huge financial involvement. Chamberbat Chakenpoursois' record over the two times he's come over here, whether you buy into that theory is obviously down to personal choice. We'll find out for certain with his run in the Champion Chase this year, because there's no excuses, ground, coming in unbelievably good nick. Obviously, Willie Mullins is still singing him in a very glowing term. So he looks the obvious each way at 9-2, but I do think she's going to win. Similar to Allaho, I just think he's got that just extra level to go to that the others haven't.
I asked Barry this. I mean, if Shishkin does win here, you know, where do you see him in terms of the greats of the National Hunt Game in recent times? Because had his doubters at times, but every question that's posed of him, he seems to come through it.
Well, the thing is, we're looking back at a lot of the champions in previous years. They had laps of honour really in this race. It was great to see Sprinter Sacras of this world and one or two others do what the odds suggested they would, but they didn't really have a lot to beat. Whereas, Shishkin's proven himself.
Well, Sprinter Sacra had to beat size in Europe, and he beat them by 18 big old margin as well.
Yeah, but I mean, I think Shishkin and Nergamine, that clash was a bigger and much built-up clash than we've seen, with Sprinter Sacra and size in Europe, in my opinion. And he's proven him. If he proves himself again over that horse and Chakenpoursois, then I think we have got to put him right up there with the very best. But look, like I say, it's conjecture, isn't it? Who's the best horse in the last 10, 20 years? It's almost an impossible question to answer. So yeah, I think she's going to win here, but will I back him at that price? Probably not, no.
Okay. Rory, over to you for the Champion Chase now. I
suppose I had to be slightly negative about Shishkin on the back of that. It's worth pointing out how many horses he's beaten in his races. I've had a theory about Shishkin, which probably won't be tested here, but 3 rivals, 4 rivals, 4 rivals, 3 rivals, 3 rivals, 3 rivals in his entire chase career. So I can't be having Shishkin at this stage being inducted into the Hall of Fame, having never faced more than 4 rivals in a race.
Then I did say, if he comes through this,
if he comes through, but again, this could be a 4 or 5 runner race as true. Well, and it's not his fault that they haven't come to face him. My view has always been since the Supreme, when he looked really vulnerable for a long way in that race. He lost his place coming down the hill. He made a bad mistake at the 3rd hurdle. And bear in mind, the only time he's met biggish fields in his life, he fell at Newbury in a race that he was expected to run away with on his hurdles debut. And then he made that really bad mistake on the Supreme. Now, he's done really well to recover from that and win the race, but he did lose his place coming down the hill in a big field. And I think in a big field over fences, he could also lose his place because he hits a flat spot. His jumping is absolutely fine, but he's not going to jump his way out of trouble. He's a bit like Altior in that regard. He's not going to make his ground up jumping. He jumps safely and then he powers into overdrive late on, and that's his strength. But a horse like that is always potentially going to find himself stuck in traffic in a big field. The problem we have is that we just don't have the depth of talent in this division to get a big field against him. So he's again going to have a smallish field here, and that means that he is much the likeliest winner. The fact that I kind of see on neutral grounds Shishkin versus a tag team of Energumen and Chacun Pour Soi as a straight fight. I see that as evens each of two. This isn't quite neutral territory because Shishkin, of course, is proven at Cheltenham. He's won twice at the festival, and Energumen's not run at the track and is coming off a setback as well, which he seems to recover from very quickly, in fairness. And the market has settled down as well. He did drift quite badly in the market and then came back into roughly the price he was before. And of course, Chacun Pour Soi has got that exceptional form at Leopardstown and Punchestown, but hasn't shown it twice here. So this feels like a home game for Shishkin. So we're kind of into Asian handicap territory. It's half goal favourite. So he should get the job done. But I think, as I said, he's not going to go to Punchestown, I wouldn't have thought. But if he went to Ireland and faced Willie's battalions, I would say that Willie might just have the edge over him with the two of them. But of course, it's you do have to have a tag team to match Shishkin, so you've got to give him credit for that. Interesting discussion I had with I don't want to name drop here, but with Ruby Walsh on a different podcast. He was of the opinion that although there wasn't much between Shishkin and Energumen at Ascot, that was the first really hard race an Energumen had, and he said, "You never know when a horse like him is winning easily. Even though he runs the race of his life and runs an absolutely massive race, because he's headed close home and he knows he's been in a battle and he knows he's lost, that can have a massive effect on a horse. And you wouldn't back an argument with confidence until you see that that the race has made a man of him. Yeah. And it works two ways. A great horse will get beat like Arkle did in his going back to the early 60s. When Arkle was beaten in the Hennessy by Millhouse, he had excuses there, but it made a man of him. He was unbeatable from that point onwards. Whereas you also get horses who look like they're going to be world beaters, and the first time they go into a big fight, a head-to-head, and they get beaten, it's just gone. Well, look at Envoy Allen. He hasn't. Once he lost the race, he just didn't look the same horse at all. I know he won a Grade 1 last time. I was the weakest Grade 1 I've ever seen. It has to be said. So a lot of horses, when they face that battle, they curl up and go backwards, and a lot of them, they man up and they're even better. So that's what we need to see from an Energumen, whether he's the type who will man up. That's a bad expression to use these days, I know, or whether he will regress from that beating, and that's going to be really interesting to see.
Absolutely going to be a fascinating tussle on Wednesday afternoon in the Champion Chase. Energumen and Chacun Pour Soi taking on Shishkin. Nuba Negra not just there to make up the numbers either at 10-1. On then to the cross country, and as I said to Barry, one of the moments of the festival last year, Tiger Roll returning to form and regaining his crown. 13-8 this time to do it. 9-2 SP last year. Delta Work 11-2. Prengard 13-2. Shady Operator 9-1. Midnight Maestro 10-1. Easy Sland 11-1. 12-1 bar. And Tiger Roll form book goes out the window, Andy. Really back where he does his thing, unless it's the Grand National, and plenty of money for him to come and do it again.
Yeah, quite rightly, he's commanded a lot of press cuttings, hasn't he, over the last few years? Column inches, as I say, for all the wrong reasons in some respects. That weights and measures argument that his owner puts up is laughable, really. Unfortunately, we won't see Tiger Roll trying to complete history at Aintree, but we might at least get the second best, which is winning here at the festival, which will be just as sweet. It made me laugh last year because he looked lethargic and out of sorts. You think, oh, will he ever be the same Tiger Roll? And all of a sudden, they're down at the start and he's like lighting up at the front. His ears were pricked. He couldn't wait. He was like a coursing dog, waiting to run after the hare. And as soon as the take went up, he was off. I think within the first half a mile of the race, you kept thinking, he got the race won.
I'd love to see what the in-running betting was saying. It was soon, because you knew as soon as in that first.
He was just on, literally, as I said, using that as an analogy, he was on the bunny all the way through the race. Never missed a beat, never looked like losing. You couldn't imagine any horse overtaking Tiger Roll. He was just totally and utterly the dominant force, and it wouldn't surprise me if they did exactly the same again. If you're having a bet in this race, if Tiger Roll's lining up at the front and they mean business like they did last year, and he gets into that same rhythm, then I don't think I'll get anywhere near him.
That's interesting because obviously his previous run in the season when he ran at Cheltenham's was it the November meeting was the first one, he looked really lethargic.
Yeah, at the back.
He didn't really want to go to the post.
Never engaged at all
he didn't look like he wanted to set off,
Yeah.
and he was beaten really early in the race.
Yeah.
And you just saw an entirely different horse in March.
Exactly what happened the race before. I think it was at Nice, wasn't he? They were pleased with him, but it just didn't look the old Tiger role. But there comes Cheltenham, he gets lit up by other place, doesn't he? And despite his advancing years, I think he'll probably do it again.
Any views on anything to take him on with? Or?
Well, Delta Work is the obvious one against him, but there'll be a very strong stat that you don't win this race without cross-country experience. I think what's his name? Also in the same colours, Rivage d'Or was a winner of this with Davy Russell doing the steering. I think that was his first cross-country run. He had gone back to points, but that was he's a horse who's won on cross-country debut. Generally speaking, you've got to have experience, and that's not hardly surprising, is it? It's such a specialist thing. Delta Work strikes me as the type who could take to it, but I'm not sure they want him spoiling the party, do they? Yeah. But they've brought him over and they give him a go, and obviously I think it's one of those scenarios where they might bring Tiger Roll over and he'd be like, I don't fancy this anymore, and they know that he doesn't fancy it. But once he arrives at the track, they'll have an idea whether Tiger Roll's up for it. But I've heard Gordon said the other day that he worked the other day and he felt like he was back to near his best. He was absolutely delighted with how that had panned out. And obviously the issue with Tiger Roll we've seen in recent times is enthusiasm or a lack of it. Yeah. And when he is up for it, he's a very, very hard horse to beat around here. And aside from that, it's just an awful race this year, isn't it? The JP horses, are both talented cross-country performers, but moving Easesland to John Joe seems like a strange move to me. John Joe doesn't exactly specialise in cross-country horses. And 2 warm-ups over hurdle. I mean, he's never run over hurdles before. You've gone back a hell of a long time until he did. And he's got very little form outside of cross-country races. He's been running in cross-country since he was a juvenile Easesland, and he's that is all he does. So you wouldn't expect him to run very well over hurdles, but at the same time, he hasn't even given himself a workout. He's run so badly, so it's hard to see him bouncing back to form. Also, he wants heavy ground, and they can't water the cross-country course, and it may well end up being quite quick there. So that'll be against Easesland. And Prongard, now he won the same race that Easesland won, the same listed cross-country race at Compiègne in November at the same age. But again, what JP did when he bought Easesland in the first place was left him where he was with David Cotin and let him get on with it, moving Prongard halfway through the season and taking him to Enda Bolger, who's an exceptionally good trainer of cross-country horses, but is bound to have completely different methods of training as cross-country horses compared to David Cotin. I just think that was a negative move, and he ran appallingly on his prep, and I thought it was unlikely that he would make it to Cheltenham on the back of that.
Interesting stuff there, analysing those who are going to be taking on Tiger Roll, but none with seemingly too positive a chance to really be taking on the champ with. Move on then to the penultimate race of the Wednesday preview, the Grand Annual Chase. 2 races left to do, and Buddy Rich is the 13-2 favourite ahead of Embittered at 8-1. Amarillo Sky and Curse of Bleem both 10-1. Time White 12-1. Ferrero Bamboo 12-1. Andy Dufresne 14s with Sky Pirate as well. Before Midnight and Editeur de Gite and Dancing on My Own and Elixir de Nuts all 16s. Plenty at 20-1 as well. Rory, over to you for the Grand Annual.
I've backed one on this on the basis that I thought it was overpriced at 33-1. I'm not sure if that's the current price about it because we just had confirmations. But I thought For Pleasure was interesting. He's got, you look at his form figures and he's fallen twice over fences this season, and he was last of 4 last time out, but he's been taking on the best, essentially over 2 miles. He's a really enthusiastic front runner who, although he has 2 falls on his card, he's fundamentally a very good jumper. He's just slightly too brave sometimes. He was, he needed to throw in a big leap at the last when he was up against Third Time Lucky at Doncaster, and he just, it was a suicidal jump really, but he wanted to win the race, and he tried his best to keep it in, and that's what saw him in the deck. He had a confidence booster then at Warwick last time out. I know he was beaten 20 lengths into 4th, but again, that was Third Time Lucky was in the race again. Edwardstone won that. It was a strong contest, and he would have benefited from that just to get over the fall he'd taken in his previous start. He gets in here with a mark of 138. Again, you look through the history of the Grand Annual, and it's all about horses who get in here on decent weights. You know, it's got a remarkably strong trend towards horses who haven't won handicaps in the season, for example. Horses who tend to come here off a poor run of results, or who've been racing in a different sort of company, or indeed novices generally. And I thought For Pleasure meets those criteria. I don't think he's a standout as such in the race, but I didn't think he was a 33-1 shot, because there are a lot of horses I wouldn't really want to have on my side in this race. This is, you've got to put your hand up and state it. This is not a particularly strong handicap.
Yeah.
Everything that wants to get into the Grand Annual gets into the Grand Annual every year. So basically, it's just like any old handicap chase at any festival meeting. It's got a range of horses in it in terms of ability and current form, and there are plenty you can put a line through. So I thought at 33-1 for a horse who's been running better than form figures imply, and he might still improve over fences and has the right run style. You definitely want to be on the pace in the Grand Annual, especially now that it's moved to the old course. The new course, Paul Carberry could keep through from the back on Belvano, but even then it helped to be reasonably handy. But on the old course, very, very hard to come from off the pace. So I'd want to have something that can jump well off the front. And as I said, despite the fact that he looks like a dodgy jumper on the figures, I don't think he really is. I think he's a pretty sound jumper on the whole, and I thought he was worth taking a chance with.
Yeah, massive price, 33-1 for Pleasure, with a couple of firms as short as 16-1 elsewhere there in the Grand Annual. Andy?
Yeah, a couple of interesting stats with kind of ties up with what Rory was saying. Amazingly, in the last century, there's only been 3 winners with more than 12 chase runs. So that suggests you do want a up-and-coming young horse. But then on the flip side of that, only one novice has won this race since 2013. That's Chosen Mate. So it's kind of a contradictory in terms, isn't it, that? So you want somewhere in between, ideally. But the fact that the only novice to do it was trained by Gordon Elliott does pay homage to the chances of Buddy Rich, who chased home Third Time Lucky early in the season here at this track around the old course. So he had a bit of a sighter, and he's just been kept fresh, not ever since. He had a couple of runs. He got beat actually by Dunvegan at Punchestown his last run, or was it Fairyhouse, when he looked like he was going to win. But I think the combination of lots of hard runs leading up to that probably just took its toll. He raced predominantly in the autumn on the better ground, but he's been safe for this, and I can guarantee he's going to be tuned up for it. I think one of the best handicapped horses in the race, but whether he's got the experience for it is open to question. He's Red Rookie. Yeah. I've been waiting for this fella to run for a little while, but he's obviously had this festival in mind, or she has, I beg your pardon, Emma Lavelle, with either the Grand Annual or the Arkle. Still in the Arkle, so the fact that she's still got him in that suggests that she thinks he's up to that class. But he's only rated 137, and he came out that race early in the season, which has chucked up a whole host of winners. We haven't seen the winner since Witness Protection, but not available. The third has won. Amarillo Sky's won 3 times. Can You Call has won, the 5th horse. Brave Shieska was 6th, who obviously took on Edwardstone the other day and is now rated in the 150s. Tokidoki was 9th, has won twice. Java Point was 10th, has won. It was just a sensational early season novice chase that was run at a suicidal gallop.
The odd thing about that as well is he wasn't particularly well placed the way
he wasn't,
as well. He was
towards the back.
He was almost ridden with a view to to getting a sight of his fences and getting a good experience first time out. I napped him that day, and I was screaming at the telly from an early stage.
I bet you were.
Don't give the leaders that much rope for crying! And he's absolutely flown home.
But he was favourite to beat Brave Shieska the next day at Ascot. He was going really well when he dived at the first one down the back, and then he hasn't run since Hereford, since he beat a small select field again when he had a strongly run race to run at. Yeah. So the pace of the race won't bother him. I think, like I say, I think he's under the radar here with 138. Considering all the horses he's been running against, the Brave Shieskas of this world, Amarillo Skies, are now 140, 150. He's really well in here.
The worry with him for me, because he'd be on my shortlist as well, is that he's been ridden to creep into his races from mid-division, and that is not going to be easy in this race.
No.
So he's going to be a hostage to fortune to a degree. But I'd agree that, you know, as I said, I napped him first time up, and then, you know, I thought he should have won that race, and I was kicking myself. I agree with Andy. He looked like he was going to win at the Ascot when he tipped up, and he got a really confident ride at Hereford. He gave the leaders plenty of rope, and Tom Bellamy rode him as if there were no doubts. And he's come through to win closely in the end. So I do like him, but if they ride him the same way here, where are the gaps going to come? That's my question.
20-1 either way for seemingly a very well handicapped
Red Romney
horse.
entry, he would bolt up in.
There you go.
I hope they've got that. If they've got that on their mind, that's because
Keep an eye. I mean,
that does suit those tactics a lot better.
Not sure to run here either. So if that is the case, then might turn up an entry in a few weeks' time. But 20-1 Red Rookie for the Grand Annual. On then to the final race of this Wednesday preview. It is a bumper, champion bumper. Facile Vega is the 11-10 favourite ahead of American Mike at 5-2. Redemption Day 6-1. James's Gate 12-1. Our Jester 20-1. Poetic Music 25-1. Music Drive 25-1. Mullenbeg 25-1. 33-1 Bar. And Andy, you said it once, twice, three times on this show. Any normal year, American Mike, Facile Vega would win this doing cartwheels, but this time they have to come up against each other. Yeah,
I think Lionel Richie said that, didn't he? Once, twice, three times a lady, the old Commodores back in the day.
Was he singing about Facile Vega?
Well, it could apply to it, couldn't it? Yeah, he's poetry in motion, isn't he? Facile Vega. I mean, wow, what a performance first time out on the clock. It was quite sensational, wasn't it, when you compared what he did to those good horses on that same card that day, up against Sir Gerard and all that. Left a good field for dead. And then he did it again, or just as easy the next time out. He actually didn't run as fast the second time, but it was just as silky. But I mean, it's hard to knock American Mike, what he's done as well. I mean, looking at our figures, we've got 65 for Facile Vega, 65 for American Mike. They're both on identical time figures.
Where do you have Redemption Day?
Oh, he's way behind. Really? He did a 48 the day that he won, which suggested that they went very slow and he sprinted, so he might have looked visually good, and you think, whoa, but actually when you crunch the numbers and look what he did, he's quickened off a slow pace. Whereas the other two, we know that they can handle a championship environment. So if you're back in Redemption Day, you run a huge risk of him being absolutely taken off his feet. Because these two can, you know, turn it on and keep going. We don't know what...
I mean, Redemption Day could well be
capable of doing that as well. You know, he could easily do it.
He obviously came with a big home reputation when he turned up for that. And unusually for one ridden by Patrick Mullins in a bumper, Patrick normally rides them to the line to get an idea of how they... He didn't ride this to the line. No. He's not actually got after it in the finish at all. So it's very difficult to put a figure on Redemption Day and say how good he is. That was an unsatisfactory race, all things considered. But he's got the reputation, and you wouldn't want to be taking him on at the prices, but at the same time, if you're a serious punter, you don't know whether he's got much in hand of the horses below him either. No. So he's a hard horse to weigh up.
He's a hard horse for me to back and select and push forward as well because of just pure numbers. I'd rather go with the ones who run a championship time already coming into the festival. That's been a tried and trusted formula for me over the years. I don't want any ifs, buts or maybes. I want to know exactly.
American Mike must be a good one for the each way multis, though, mustn't he?
Absolutely, yeah. We've got another one here.
What's he to be? He must be. He's 10s on to be placed.
He's 10s on to be placed. He'll definitely be. Look, I mean, they should pull well clear.
Put them both in again.
Put them both in. Well, I tell you, there's a horse in this race. I do think he's going to be 40s on the day, 40, 50 to 1. But if they bet 4 or 5 places and we got enough runners, I'm definitely going to have a few quid on Joyeux Machine. Trained by Paul Nolan, who's had a really good season. He had 20 odd, 30 odd winners this season, Paul. But he chased home Facile Vega first time out, and he went through the race like a really good horse. Obviously, he was up against Facile Vega, who's another level. But he was well clear of the rest. Now, I'm not saying Joe Machu's going to turn the form out. I don't think he will. But he went on to win next time out, and he got all sorts of trouble that day, and he still managed to win. Yeah. But I do like the way he goes through his races, and he's the kind of horse that I think he'll still be with them because he's already gone with Facile Vega in a fast time. Yeah. He'll be bang there coming down the bottom of the hill. And if a lot of the horses who are just, oh God, what's going on here, are completely in a culture shock, he won't be because he's run a fast time.
He's a big price, not because people are comparing him to other horses with similar form to him. It's because he's been comprehensively beaten by the favourite. Therefore, people go, right, well, that's the first horse you
Rule
rule
him
out.
out,
And you should always try to rank the horses in order if you're making a book. And he'd be a lot higher there than the market has him at the moment, because it's just making that easy assumption. You cannot beat the favourite, therefore you're lying through you. Whereas, you know, he's actually produced a very good speed figure himself, and clearly he's got the 2 runs behind him. He improved to win. Well, he won second time out. He probably would have improved in a truly run race. But yeah, I agree with that. He's interesting.
I think he's a better horse than Seabank Bistro, who's Paul Nolan's other horse, and he's only a 25-1 shot. If you gave me a match bet there and you were going odds on Seabank Bistro, I'd have everything on Julian Machine beating him.
The other one I'll throw in this, it's just unfortunately it's such a strong race. I think Rosie Redrum is a really, really nice mare in the making. I saw her up close at Newbury. No, he'll run her here. Okay. It's the Mullenbeg is the one who won at Cheltenham that Milton is going to. Yes, she runs in the listed bumper at Sandown, or the Grade 2, whatever it is. That's Saturday, isn't it? Yeah. That's what Milton's plan was. But even after she won at Cheltenham, he said, "Oh, I think she'll go to injury because I've got one better. I've got one better at home." And that's Rosie Redrum. Now she was beaten in that good listed bumper at Newbury, which used to be a Grade 2, didn't it? Yeah. It's been downgraded as a listed class. It maybe wasn't the strongest of races this year, but she was ridden out the back, as she was on debut, and she won really nicely. She was given an awful lot to do by Mitch Bastian, and she flew home down the outside. The winner was right on the inside and hung towards the left as well, so she never actually saw him in the race. She finished off really strongly to be second. It looked like she was going to get there with a furlong to run. She's better than the bare form. I went to see her after the race. It's always interesting to see horses after they've run and see whether they're looking like they've had a really hard race and didn't fancy it, or whether they're. And she was full of herself afterwards. She's quite a big filly, and she's really well put together. Milton has gone on record saying she'd be listed class at least on the flat. She's a better filly at home than Mullenbeg, and I think she's capable of hitting the frame. She's been talked up a little bit. I think you get a bigger price on the day than you're getting at the moment, but because she's a 4-year-old filly, she gets in with 10 stone 2, and I think because of the weight she's getting and the fact she's pretty forward physically, I think she'll run above herself and she could hit the frame. But it's the front 2 are so strong that there's limited options for backing her each way. Maybe you'll have a market without the favourite and a market without the front 2 in this race as well, in which she'd be reasonably interesting, as would the Paul Nolan horse.
Rosie Redrum 40-1 as well, 2 40-1 shots there to end Wednesday's preview. Thank you very much to both Andy and for Rory for sharing their thoughts on the racing on Wednesday, and on Tuesday we'll be recording Thursday and Friday now, so do check the oddschecker YouTube channel, subscribe there, and on any podcast app you'll find all of our previews plus plenty more content around all sports there too. Thank you to our sponsors 888 Sport and their ambassador Barry Geraghty for joining me and Andy earlier and sharing his thoughts on all 4 days as well. Fingers crossed for a cracking Wednesday of racing, hopefully some good insight and a few winners in there as well. But as ever, please do gamble responsibly.